It is so great to be here with all of you, and even more exciting to have these four remarkable panelists join me today to talk about community leadership and what that looks like, how it's changed, what are the new needs for leadership, and how do we make certain that we are meeting those needs in the last 2 years. I know we all know that the world has changed dramatically in the last 2 years, and some of that has meant that the way the social sector looks at how we will address change and how we will work towards alleviating the inequalities in our communities, how that changes and how leadership looks different in ensuring that we are moving forward. So today we have four amazing panelists who are going to share a little bit about their perspectives on the changing needs of leadership in North Carolina. So with that, and because I know you're eagerly awaiting hearing from them, I'm going to turn it over first to Sherri. Sherri, we'd love to hear a little bit about your background, and also that you've spent your career developing leadership opportunities for educators, students, social sector leaders. How does that translate to today and the creation of new opportunities in the nonprofit sector?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Sherri Chisholm. I am the executive director of a nonprofit called Leading on Opportunity here in Charlotte. Before I talk a little bit about my perspective on the changing needs of leadership in nonprofit, I think it's helpful to understand my journey and how it's informed my perspective. I am a recent transplant to North Carolina. I am a Detroit native. And as a Black woman from Detroit, most folks are not originally from Detroit. So my family migrated to Detroit as a part of the Great Migration in hopes of better opportunity. So they left their home in search of better. And so they moved from rural Alabama to Detroit. My grandfather worked in the auto industry on the Ford line in a plant. My grandmother was a teacher's aide. The next generation, my mom went on to become a teacher, and I have spent the bulk of my career in social change in K-12 district leadership. So generation after generation, my family was able to make that upward mobility, which is what we're seeking to achieve at Leading on Opportunity. We want it to be possible that folks don't have to leave their home in search of opportunity, but that experience and opportunity is available to them right here in Charlotte, which right now is not true. And so when I think about my professional experience that has been steeped in both corporate experience as well as nonprofit, it was largely driven by the experiences that my grandparents laid for me, but also folks who invested deeply in me in both of those sectors. So having the opportunity to develop from within. And as I think about what the nonprofit sector or just the workforce sector needs largely now in North Carolina, it's the opportunity for those who are here to be given the opportunity to develop skills, to flex their leadership abilities, and to have opportunities that are required for senior level positions in nonprofit. And so that's when I think about what the need is here and how we might be able to create that. It's thinking about jobs and programs that enable that success. And making sure that we're thinking deeply about what it looks like. The second part is deeply about what it looks like to diversify those roles. Thankfully, we're in a place where folks are beginning to understand that diverse perspectives are necessary, but it also means that the way that we recruit and retain them also needs to be equitable. And so those two things, I think, are desperately in need now in terms of nonprofit leadership development.
Thank you. And Sherri, what I particularly noted and what I particularly appreciated was the baseline of, no, it's not working. We do not have the leadership that we need, and folks do not have the opportunities that they need in order for us to see a new type of leadership. And I would make the assumption that starting from it's not working and we need to make it work is one of the ways that we will begin to see change. Mm-hmm. So really appreciate that perspective. Switching now to corporate perspective and the ways in which talent is developed in that sector, I'm pleased to have Leslie with us today. Leslie, Fidelity has been a leader in considering how to recruit and retain talent. You've made a point to recruit some of the folks that Sherri was just talking about, teachers and nonprofit community leaders, and to develop the programming that cultivates that talent. What are your goals for leadership at Fidelity?
Well, thanks, Elizabeth, and hello, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. I'm glad you're all here. It's an important one, and I'm glad that we're talking about it. You know, Fidelity has incredibly aggressive hiring goals, and you know, post-pandemic, it's the associates market right now with the Great Resignation. Folks just finding their center and finding what they care about and what their values are. They're seeking opportunities that are different maybe than 3 years ago because they're more in touch with themselves. So we're really looking and listening to what our next employee wants and needs from their employer. I mean, I think we've all heard that people leave their jobs. People don't leave jobs, they leave their managers. So good management, good leaders are really important to be cultivated if you're going to attract the right talent. We know now that flexibility is a requirement now that we've seen productivity at home. So we are offering something we call dynamic working. But what we're seeing mostly in the current generation of employees and associates is that they're looking for alignment with their personal values, whether that be corporate sustainability, diversity and inclusion, as Sherri was talking about. Companies are going to have to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk on these things if they're going to attract the kind of talent they need to be successful in the future. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about at Fidelity, and I know other companies as well who are sponsors and part of this day.
Thanks, Leslie. It's so interesting to hear your perspective that it's time to flip the equation so that companies are listening and crafting employment based upon what their associates are looking for, which hopefully allows for a diversification of who those associates are and what their backgrounds are as well. So really appreciate that perspective. Laura, turning now to you. In the last 2 years, the United Way has shifted its entire model for funding and capacity building to begin supporting place-based and grassroots organizations. Tell us about that. What are some of the differences in leadership that you're seeing? And what are some of the assumptions that we need to move past in working with those organizations? We're eager to hear your role and United Way's role in leading that change.
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks for the opportunity to be with all of you today. So I'm Laura Yates Clark, the president and CEO of United Way of Central Carolinas, which is based in Charlotte. We have made a shift over the last several years from being a very traditional United Way that funded traditional institutional partners to really focus our work on place-based, neighborhood-based work and grassroots organizations. And that's driven largely by our focus on racial equity and really believing that we need to harness resources and power in the communities that are most disproportionately impacted by some of the challenges our city and our region face. So for us, that's meant really moving away from funding institutional partners that are doing great work in the community, but have had the benefit of United Way support in many cases for decades, and instead inviting a whole new group of organizations to the table that have historically been marginalized and not had the same kind of access to capital and resources that our traditional partners have had. From a leadership perspective, we have felt it very important to not just give unrestricted operating support, which is what United Way always does, but to provide that capacity building and leadership development alongside, and not in a paternalistic way, but instead as a partner with these organizations to say, what is it that you need? What do you need to develop as a leader? What does your organization need? And then let's see what United Way can bring to the table by way of resources. So initially, all of our grassroots partners go through the Duke University Certificate in Nonprofit Management Training Program. And then in their subsequent years of funding, we co-develop, co-create with each of them the leadership development opportunities that make sense for them. And we put cohorts together where there are common interests, right? So if multiple of them need help with board development, then we'll put them together for that kind of work, but they each get individual coaching as well. And I'll just say, you know, for me, I'm a community psychologist by training, and most people don't know what that is, but it basically is taking the principles of psychology and using them to build healthy communities and healthy neighborhoods. And I think what United Way has realized, both through the racial unrest that we've experienced over the last few years as a community and as a country, and through the pandemic, is that we needed to hold the mirror up and hold ourselves accountable for the fact that we had not always centered the community in the work that we were doing. That instead, United Way's model was to center the nonprofits that we funded. And we really need to be thinking about the communities and the populations they serve first, and identifying what those communities think the needs and assets are, and then bringing the resources to bear, and not having sort of the static list of organizations and it's that or nothing. So it's the past couple of years have been huge learning for United Way. We're really excited about this new direction and supporting a different kind of organization and a different kind of leader.
Thank you. I imagine for many nonprofits, it's scary to think about not being at the center of the solutions, but rather listening to the community. And yet, I think as we've heard from both Sherri and Leslie, that's how we create change, which is to have that voice be front and center and to throw out the infrastructure that we have clung to for so many decades, because clearly it's not working. Thank you. Jarian, we are so pleased to have you with us today. You were instrumental in bringing Skills for Cities to North Carolina. What were your goals in doing so? And how did you see this as an opportunity to develop leadership for your city and the state?
Well, thank you very much for having me. You know, Common Impact and obviously all of our volunteers from MetLife, Truist, Fidelity, and of course, Equitable are doing all the hard work. So yes, it was a vision based on a past experience with Common Impact that kind of brought this to life, but all of you that are participating today deserve all the credit. You know, I really wanted to provide a sense of community, expose our volunteers to perhaps a new way to have an impact. We've largely been limited in how we can move around, and is it safe? It's awkward. It's stressful to think about. You know, you don't want to be the one that's like, hey, let's go volunteer, and then have to answer a lot of questions about how are you testing, masking, social distancing. So I think that this could be a model for the future to really demonstrate impact, but do it in a way that is a bit more flexible and analogous to this new way that we're all working that Leslie talked about in this hybrid, flexible workspace. So really, it's an awareness piece. We dipped our toe a little bit with Common Impact and Skills for Cities last October, a broader event focused on organizations around racial equity and social justice, and use some of our learnings from that involvement with some select volunteers to inform what today could look like, more focused on this region. I have the pleasure of working with Laura and her team in a multitude of capacities, have started working with the Leading on Opportunity, and many of us in this space, whether we're on the nonprofit side, for-profit side, foundation, we are striving to have some of the same objectives and have a positive impact and move the needle. And I think we're learning and have learned, and it's been documented, but like, going it alone is, you can't change these things that are 100 years in the making systematically. You've got to do it together with really smart people. I think today's a demonstration of that. And, you know, maybe the last piece I'd share that is really important to me, and one of the goals is, so much of the work that we focus on at Equitable is around working with young people to open their eyes, remove barriers, and get them thinking about what life after high school looks like. Post-secondary education is not for everybody. Maybe it's trade school, but a high-paying, hopefully living wage job should be part of everyone's plans. I think we take for granted sometimes, and my colleagues, and this is not to disparage them at all, but like, if you grew up or you're around in an environment where you talk about planning for your future and making the right decisions and looking someone in the eye when you shake their hand and following up appropriately when someone spends time with you, those are very simple things that are not always taught. So I spend a lot of time in the work we do, kind of the interventions or the programs around teaching these soft skills and how important that is, right? And we should not take those for granted. And I also think through this engagement with Skills for Cities that my colleagues, there are some soft skills that are being developed. You know, you get thrown into a group and you've got to learn to give and take and do your part and not be the first to speak all the time. And someone's going to have an emergency and not be able to maybe hold up their end of the obligation today. But that's like working and that's life. And I think you practice that, you get repetitions and you just get better at it. So I think in a small way too, this is a microcosm, not only like what we do in the community, but I think there's benefit internally to our employees as well that participate. And I'm hoping that today just kind of creates a spark for my company for sure. But if it's Fidelity, true as all these other companies that are involved today, I'm so thankful and hope that they see this as like, maybe this is a unique way we can give back and have a positive impact.
Thank you. And what I really appreciate about all of the pieces that I've heard and all of the comments is around the idea that whatever we've been doing to date, it's not getting us where we need to go. And so we need to acknowledge that. We need to change how leadership is developed. We need to change who are the people that are developing leadership programming. And this universal we that I keep using needs to in some ways be removed, that we need to be, that there needs to be an opportunity to really come together and let those who are living and working in their communities be the leader and follow where they are going. So I really appreciate all of you sort of starting out, sharing your different perspectives on leadership. I have some questions for all of you, but I also really want to encourage our audience. If you have questions, please go ahead and drop those in the chat, and I will make a point to save some time at the end. I get the privilege of asking these very smart people all about their perspective of leadership, but if you have questions of your own, would welcome them as well. So I'd like to start, and some of this was referenced in different ways by all of you, in hearing a little bit about what are the double wins in leadership development. What does that look like? So the moments when we are seeing something that is good for a community and good for an individual. The moments when we are seeing something that enhances a recruitment strategy, but also diversifies it. So would love to open that question up to our panelists and see, hear some of your responses as to what are some of those double wins.
I can start with one, Elizabeth, if you like.
That's great, Leslie. Thank you.
You know, I think about the first thing that comes to mind. I mentioned to folks that I'm actually at a conference right now with the nation's governors. And it reminded me that, you know, 3 individuals, employee volunteers at Fidelity, worked on a common impact project and built a tool for the state of North Carolina to help teachers connect with corporate volunteers so that they can bring the outside into the classroom. They can do some of the, you know, exposure to careers that we were talking about earlier for students. We can, they can sort of shop for experiences, apprenticeships, job shadow opportunities, or guest lecturers, whatever they need. And, you know, the skills-based volunteerism opportunity gave that small team the opportunity to be leaders in our state to make that happen. You know, they're software developers during the day. And they did this incredible thing. And I think we launched it 4 years ago, and Governor Cooper was talking about it today. The Rhode Island governor was talking about it because the code got shared with Rhode Island. And I think Delaware is looking at it. So what an opportunity for 3 people to be incredible leaders.
Great to hear. And I hope that those 3 individuals get the chance to hear about that and to know that leadership looks different. It doesn't necessarily look like holding a C-suite title. It looks like creating change. So I'm curious, Sherri, Laura, from your perspective, what would you say are these double wins?
I was thinking about it a bit differently as I was thinking about Laura's work, because I know it so well here in Charlotte, that the wins at the onset don't always feel good or feel like wins. I mean, Laura can talk about her work with such fluency because she led it, but inherent in the things that, I've heard her name, like shifting to a community-centered approach, bringing corporate along, thinking of yourself as a partner as opposed to someone who's pushing your ideas on someone. There was a lot of risk and struggle in that to make that possible. Now, the reward on the back end is, yes, the community is centered. The community now, or the win is they now have the skills to advocate for themselves, to center their own agency. The corporate community has shifted their perspective of what philanthropy looks like, and on and on and on. And I want to be honest about the level of risk that Laura had to undertake for that to be possible, and yet the benefit that has come out on the other side. So when I think about the wins, an example like that comes to mind for me, and it takes as we talk about leadership, strong leader to do that and to put forward a new vision when folks are used to operating in the status quo.
Yeah. Thanks, Sherri. That's very, very kind of you to say. And it has been, there've been some scary moments along the way, and it continues to be a transition. This is still, in some ways, a fundraising risk for United Way because it is so pushing us outside of what United Way has traditionally thought of. But we're going to die trying, right? Because what we were doing wasn't working, and we were being really candid about that with the community. As far as the double wins go, I mean, we have learned so much from this experience that started out very small, funding grassroots organizations. After we had an officer-involved shooting in Charlotte about 5 years ago, we said, what can we do differently? It was a very small grant pool. We thought it would be a one-time thing, and it has now turned into what's leading our work. And that's only because we were open to that. We wanted that feedback. We wanted to know how we could be different and better. And we've met the grassroots and neighborhood-based leaders where they are. And I think somebody made the point, leadership takes different forms and it looks like different things. And most people don't go into the nonprofit sector because they want to look at financial statements and manage HR issues all day. I know I certainly didn't, right? And I've run a startup nonprofit where I was the only employee. And I know what it's like to feel like there's a big secret book of fundraising rules nobody will give you, and you keep making mistakes and nobody will tell you, right? And so if we can help ease that path a little bit and candidly help some of these partners learn how to play the game a little bit and share that social capital, what we are so pleased to see is that as we are funding these organizations and these tremendous leaders, it's opening up doors to new funding and different funding. And I don't think we should make the assumption that because these are smaller nonprofits or they're newer nonprofits or they're grassroots, that the leaders are not incredibly strong. Right? They often are. And a lot of them have been at it for a long time. They just haven't been to the table. And I think sometimes I hear funders talk about this community of nonprofits, grassroots and and place-based. And it's sort of like, we need to bring them along. We're the ones that need to be brought along most of the time. Right. Mm-hmm. And so if we can use United Way resources to help facilitate what they want to do, then, but it does require, to Sherri's point, you have to give something up in that equation, and everybody's not always up for that.
Well, Laura, and it's hard. It's harder what you're talking about. I think corporate community relations is even trying to follow your lead. We're still going to do our food drives, and we're still going to bring some volunteers over to paint the high school gym. Yep. But taking that leadership moment and listening to the community and saying, what is it that you need, rather than the company showing up and saying, here's what we have for you.
And look,
it's
another
harder.
shift for United Way has been around volunteerism, because we have very much been historically the corporate volunteer partner that readily takes out hundreds of people and does landscaping and does painting. And I still believe that has a place, but we want to move our volunteers to deeper relationships in these communities. They have so often seen people come and go. And we want a corporation to say, we're in it for the long haul. And so that might be doing the things on an annual basis, like landscaping and things like that. But it might also be the skills-based volunteering, which for our grassroots organizations, that's really what they need: a marketing person. They need somebody to help with their IT. They need to build their business first, right? So that's been another risk for us as we've moved in that direction, because our, some of our corporate partners have been like, whoa, what do you mean you're not going to do X?
I think a double win too is you hear so much about like the isolation and, perhaps working from home and just not being around people hasn't been great for everybody. And opportunities like this to lend your subject matter expertise on a subject to benefit a community partner, but also create some community, develop some friendships. I mean, if you didn't feel comfortable reaching out to someone maybe you didn't know for coffee or a virtual meeting after 5-6 hours a day, I don't know what would help fuel that, right? And so to me, those are kind of double wins in some respects. And as Laura is talking about this transformation change and kind of a different way to do this, I mean, I think her organization, what she's led in transforming the way that United Way impacts our community, is really a blueprint, and something that, at Equitable, we recently were able, it took some time to make sure we could, it fit for what United Way wanted to do and what would work for our organization. But we made a 5-year commitment to their third United neighborhood, the Lakeview community here locally in Charlotte, for those that are not familiar with that. And it's under that premise of like, we're not going to solve any structural change in one event, but 5 years is a long time to bring people along and get them engaged. And to Laura's point, one day we're going to do a cleanup as part of our Live United Day on April 30th. But I hope subsequently we're going to go and help the community quarterback there that says this is really what our school needs, or what one of our local nonprofits needs: some marketing help, some public relations help, some legal help. No better group to ask than us, that we've said, hey, we're invested and we're in this for the long haul. So I think there's a lot of great things that can come out of these type of partnerships and an event like today.
Yeah, long-term investment, shocking that would come from a financial services company, right?
So true. And I think the idea of long-term investment and the acceptance that what success looks like is not necessarily what we want success to look like. So Laura, when you and I were talking, you said something that just stuck with me, which is what these grassroots organizations, what they define as success may not be growing financially. It may be the way in which they serve the community. And so having partnerships with the corporate sector that make that possible, that accept that what they define as success is not what someone else does, is going to be critically important. So I love all of this. I also want to talk about how hard it is. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the limits in leadership development. I know that was a question in the chat. What is self-sacrificing leadership? And how do we diversify the definition of, as I was just talking about, how do we diversify the definition of a successful leader?
Hey, I'd like to say this. I think I'm going to answer the question. It may take me a second to get there, but like when I think about the changes, again, this is an example, like TIAA, Fidelity, Truist, Equitable. There's a lot of overlap in different areas, right? There probably was a time in this community and others where it was like, if they're involved, I'm out. They do that. We don't, but we've learned that if you want to go farther, you go together, the old, adage. So I think sometimes putting your ego aside or whose logo is bigger for the good of the community, like that is, that's a way you have to sacrifice as a leader, informing others that maybe don't live in this space, that in order to have impact, like, I don't care who wants to reach across the aisle. If we all want to solve some of the same things, let's work together and kind of put the ego or, those things aside, because that's not going to benefit our communities. And
Absolutely.
Definitely is a microcosm of that.
So true. I remember the days in which you couldn't put financial services logos anywhere near each other, let alone people in a room. So seeing that change, seeing folks here today is really powerful.
So I'd like to weigh in on the concept of self-sacrificing leadership, at least from the nonprofit perspective, and push back a little bit. Is that something we should even be striving for, right? So I just had lunch with a nonprofit director today, who her organization, because of the pandemic, grew from a couple of $1 million to they are now managing $70 million because of government contracts, right? Tremendous growth, and it's mostly been good. She has not had a day off in months. She is doing all of the minutes for all of her committees, for her board. She doesn't have an assistant. I mean, on and on and on, right? That is the kind of sacrifice that I think nonprofit directors think they are expected to make, because we live in a starvation cycle. It is not healthy, it is not sustainable, and it's not what anybody would expect in any other sector. And so I think we have to start talking about leadership from a wellness perspective as much as anything else. And how do we help build their organizations in a way that they have the infrastructure that they need, the reasonable infrastructure to deliver on their mission and not kill themselves, right? I don't want her to burn out. I don't want her to quit a year from now, but she's well on the way, right? And I think we've all got to teach ourselves to talk about nonprofit leadership a little bit different. You can be mission driven and mission focused, and you can still have a life and sleep and, not have high blood pressure. But I think the starvation cycle we live in has created an unhealthy dynamic that unfortunately the pandemic has really exacerbated. And I worry that, we are on the precipice of seeing some real nonprofit burnout. And for these grassroots and neighborhood-based organizations, I think they're particularly at risk of it, because they are stretching themselves so thin to meet the needs of their communities.
Yeah, I think that's really, we talk a lot about how leadership looks and what it feels like, but I love the concept that what it looks like in part is supporting wellness, that supporting mental and physical health is part of leadership development. That feels so very right.
And if I had just learned that lesson earlier, I might not have so much gray hair. So I really want to help others.
Sherri, I'm curious to hear, with your perspective and your background, how Laura's points ring to you, and how that thought of self-sacrificing leadership feels to you.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. I worked a lot when I was in corporate and made a lot more money. And I work more now that I am in nonprofit. And I agree with everything that Laura has said. One thing that I have learned since being in nonprofit is that I have to be able to manage self first. And that often means saying no. And as Laura said, the scary part about saying no is that going to mean a loss in funding? If I'm not in that room with that one person who I haven't met yet, what happens if we don't make that connection? We're often driven by fear. And so I think that there are things we can do individually as leaders in managing ourselves and managing our teams, but also I think it would be helpful if the dynamic of the space shifted as well. We're often operating from a place of urgency because the need is great, but we don't need to lose ourselves in the process. So I go back to what I can control and what I know I hold as true, and that is my time. And I'm not great at it. I mean, Laura and I, we know each other well. Some weeks are better than others. But it is just as important to me when thinking about my schedule, like that I'm scheduling my workout, that I have time at home with my daughter, makes me a better leader the next day. So yes, self-sacrifice is a part of it, but not at the detriment of our health.
Yeah, over and over again, what I'm hearing from all of you is the idea that what brought us to where we were 2 years ago, where we were 3 years ago, can't take us forward. That it's not going to look the same going forward. Leslie, I'm wondering how you're seeing that in some of the newer associates that are starting with Fidelity.
Oh, it's a real challenge. This is some of the hardest leadership challenges we've had in a long time. There is a large percentage of our population, our new hires over the last 2 years, who have never set foot on our campus. They have never met their manager in person. They've never met a teammate in person. So that's a real challenge for culture building and developing associates. And we're just doubling down on career mobility opportunities, investing in their professional development as much as we can. And we're trying to extend a lot of that into the community as well. As Laura and Sherri were talking about earlier, nonprofit directors are really challenged right now. They've been through the ringer more than any of us. And one thing that I think helps strengthen a nonprofit leader is to have a strong board of directors behind them and helping them with the governance and the leadership of the organization. So we have an initiative where we are trying to place some of our skilled and talented people onto nonprofit boards to help fortify the expertise and the skills on those boards. And, that's a great thing, but I heard just today a great phrase that innovation is without equity is a hollow win. So while we may be doing something innovative, if it's not achieving equity in some way, you really can't call it a win. So that's what, if you look at boards of directors in the state of North Carolina, they're not very diverse. So we're really trying to dig deep into our talent pool to help address that.
Yeah, I think that I really appreciate that as a point, and that new for the sake of new. And I've been talking a lot about how things need to change and how we need to make certain that we are, not doing the same. But I appreciate the call out that new for the sake of new is not actually going to solve challenges, because if it's not moving towards our goals, it's not gonna have a difference. We have just a few minutes left, so I want to give each of the panelists a chance to wrap up their remarks and their comments. Jarian, I'll start with you and give you a minute to wrap us up, and then I'll move on to some of our other panelists.
Yes, thank you. Well, again, I just want to thank all of the partners represented, as well as the volunteers that have taken time out of your very busy days to be part of National Volunteer Week and this effort with Common Impact to support our region. I hope that this is something that you'll be able to share, be proud of. LinkedIn, there'll be a lot of ways for you to socialize this and hopefully get others within your organization or your network of influence to say, like, I want to learn more about that. We want to continue to present this and make this available for our partners in the region. And I could not be more thankful for those of you that have made the time. To Laura, Sherri, and Leslie, thank you. I know that we don't always get a chance to work together in day to day, but the fact that you're here and sharing this knowledge and information with everyone to hopefully inspire them to think about how they can give back is unique, but very much appreciated. So on behalf of Equitable and all of our volunteers, I'm just thankful for you all today and excited about the impact that we'll have in these final hour or so together.
Well, we have you to thank for bringing us together.
Leslie, I was just going to turn it to you. So,
well, I'll call out a great leader on the chat, Rick Adamson, a colleague of mine, a terrific leader for Fidelity. He said, "Don't confuse activity with progress," and I just think that really takes the cake. But what I'd like to close with is, we've been talking about leadership, and, Elizabeth, you even acknowledged that, it doesn't take a title to be a leader. I just want to, challenge everybody here today. You've given a lot of yourselves today, and we appreciate it. And I know that the nonprofits we're serving appreciate the work you're doing, but don't wait for the title to be a leader. Everybody can be a leader in place, and even small things add up to big change. So I hope you'll think and be inspired by what you've heard from everybody today, and think about how you can lead.
Thank you. Sherri.
Like Jarian and Leslie, I would also say thank you for providing the space to, share my perspective. I think Jarian for, leading the charge. I am thankful to be able to have the conversation with funders and nonprofits. Quite honestly, we work often together, and so to be able to speak authentically and in partnership with one another is really beautiful. I also encourage those who have decided to commit to the work from wherever their corner of the world is, whether it be corporate, nonprofit, volunteerism. We need you, and nonprofit, just like any other profession, it's a career. It's something you work at, and you're constantly tweaking along the way, both your skill sets in that particular area and as a leader. So I applaud you all for investing in the time, and thank you for your continued investment in the work.
And Laura, I'll let you wrap up our panelists.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks, Jarian, Leslie, and Sherri. It's been an honor to serve on a panel with all of you and to be with the group. I think I would say to everybody who's working with nonprofits in any kind of volunteer capacity, seek first to understand, right? Ask more questions than you're answering, and really prioritize the relationships with the people within those nonprofits or in the communities that you're serving. I recently said to our team that we're starting every meeting from now on with remember we are humans first, right? So we're starting every internal meeting with how is everybody doing? And I think getting back to being in person after this virtual reality we've been living in, it's a good reminder. And the same goes for your relationships with your nonprofit partners, is they really have been through a very, very difficult time, and it continues. I mean, it's not over for them, and it's not over for those they serve. And so if they can have you as a partner, as a sounding board, as someone who's trying to help them problem solve collectively, and not just somebody else coming in telling them what they should do or how they should do it, I think you'll find that the relationship goes a lot further.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists as well. I want to thank the great comments in the chat from all of our audience. I was making some furious notes here in taking things down, and also thinking about, when I tend to come to the conversation and talk about leadership, I'm often talking about what we need to do professionally. But I feel like it was a really important reminder that part of that is what we need to do personally, and making space for that, and allowing for us to show up at work as our full selves. So I really want to thank each of you, and I'm excited to see these future generation leaders that are growing and coming to the forefront of the work that we're doing.